The winter of 1874 in the high plains of New Mexico territory was a season that spared no one. Snow fell like splintered glass, sharp and unyielding, blanketing the endless prairie and the rugged cliffs that carved the land into jagged silhouettes. It was in the heart of this frozen expanse that Clara Whitlock, barely 20 summers old, found herself bound to a gnarled tree with coarse hemp rope, the fibers biting into her delicate wrists. Her dress, once cream and embroidered, hung tattered and soaked with the bitter cold clinging to her like a second skin. Her lips were a shade of blue that made her teeth glint with a ghostly pallor, and her breath came in shallow, rattling bursts. The men who had done this, coarse settlers with faces lined by hard winters and harder vices, rode off on their horses, laughing cruelly as they disappeared over the horizon, leaving Clara to the elements. Her mind raced not with fear but with disbelief. She had only shown kindness, had tended to an Apache boy who had wandered into their ranch days before, and yet this was her punishment. The snowstorm whipped around her like an angry spirit, cutting through her thin dress and chilling her to the bone. Her mother's lullabies, the smell of her father's hearth, and the quiet warmth of her home seemed like distant dreams, swallowed by the relentless wind. Alone, Clara tried to lift her chin against the storm, but her arms ached, her fingers stiffened to uselessness, and the tree that held her became both her anchor and her prison. She whispered prayers into the wind, murmurs meant for a god she wasn't certain listened to mortal pleas. Snow swirled into her hair, freezing the tears that had escaped her eyes. Minutes stretched into hours, or so it seemed, until a sound and a crunch of boots against snow pierced the raging storm. At first, she thought it was her imagination, that the wind had formed voices from the hollow plains, but the footsteps drew nearer, steady and deliberate, and then he appeared, a shadow moving through the white haze like a living memory of the land itself. Taza, an Apache warrior, emerged from the storm, his tall figure wrapped in a thick deerskin cloak, a knife glinting at his side. His eyes were dark, pools of deep knowledge and quiet fire, and he stopped only a few feet away from her, assessing, measuring, judging. He had watched the settlers' cruelty from afar and had tracked their trail. Knowing this girl, whose courage and mercy had saved his brother, was now at their mercy. "Child of the snow," he murmured, his voice calm and unwavering. "They left you for the spirits." With swift hands, he cut the ropes that bound her wrists, letting her drop to the cold ground. The impact stole her breath for a moment, but before she could cry out, he swept her into his arms, wrapping her in the thick blanket he had carried. The heat from his body seeped into her frozen limbs, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara felt warmth. "You'll never be cold again," he promised, his breath brushing her hair, carrying a scent of pine and smoke, the wild frontier itself. As he carried her through the blizzard, Clara's mind swirled with questions, fear, and gratitude. Every step was a battle against the storm, snow clinging to their clothing, biting at exposed skin. The wind howled like a living thing, carrying with it the echoes of the men who had left her to die. But Taza's presence was an unspoken vow of protection, a promise that no harm would come while he walked beside her. His movements were fluid and deliberate, each step measured to keep both of them safe. Finally, after what felt like hours of trudging through knee-deep snow, they reached a hidden canyon, a sanctuary carved into the red cliffs that rose like ancient sentinels from the plain. The overhang offered shelter from the worst of the storm, and beneath it a small fire burned, its flames licking the cold air with soft orange light. Clara's body trembled violently as Taza laid her down gently, covering her with the remaining warmth of his cloak. He knelt beside her, feeding the fire with kindling, eyes flicking constantly to her pale face. "You are safe now," he said simply, more statement than question. "The wind cannot reach you here." Clara's teeth chattered as she tried to speak, but only a whimper escaped. Her gratitude was suffused with awe. This man, whose people she barely understood, had risked everything to save her from the merciless plains. Slowly, as she warmed against the fire, the pain in her limbs lessened, though her spirit still bore the memory of betrayal. Taza was quiet as he worked, moving like a shadow that belonged to the land itself. He tore pieces of his blanket to wrap around her arms and legs, preventing frostbite from settling in. When he offered her a small sip of water he had melted from the snow, Clara felt her lips crack in a tentative smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile but sincere. I don't know how to repay you." Taza shook his head, his dark eyes softening. The snow does not ask for thanks. The land provides and the wind guides. It is only right that we protect those who are good. His words carried a weight that felt older than the cliffs themselves. Clara realized then that she had not merely been rescued. She had been seen, truly seen, by someone who understood courage in its quietest form. As the storm finally began to ease, the canyon became a haven from the winter world outside. Clara leaned against the warmth of the fire, her body healing in the quiet strength of Taza's presence. And as night fell over the snowy plains, she allowed herself for the first time to believe that she had been given a second chance. Not just at life, but at connection, at love. Somewhere beneath the endless sky, in the frozen heart of the New Mexico wilderness, the promise lingered in the air, carried in the crackle of the fire and the steady warmth of the man beside her. You'll never be cold again. The storm that had left Clara Whitlock shivering and half-frozen in the snow now faded into memory, though the biting cold lingered in every inch of the canyon. Taza led her carefully along a narrow, hidden path between jagged cliffs, each step measured to avoid loose rocks and sudden drops. The canyon walls rose like silent sentinels, their red and ochre hues muted beneath a veil of snow and mist. It was a place that seemed untouched by the cruelty of men, sacred in its isolation, and Clara could not help but feel both awe and fear as she stumbled along the frozen trail, leaning on Taza's broad shoulders for support. By the time they reached the shelter he had prepared, Clara was exhausted, her body still shivering violently despite the heavy blanket wrapped around her. The overhang of the canyon formed a natural roof, shielding them from the worst of the wind, while a small fire burned low on a bed of stones, casting flickering shadows across the icy walls. Smoke curled upward, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. The warmth touched Clara's chilled bones like a balm, and she sank to the ground, her fingers brushing the frozen dirt. She was still trembling, not only from the cold, but from the shock of what had happened, and from the quiet presence of the man who had saved her life. Taza moved with ease around the fire, checking the meat that had been slowly roasting over the coals, his hands steady despite the chill. Every motion was deliberate, almost ritualistic, and Clara watched him with a mix of fascination and awe. He spoke little, his voice calm and measured, yet each word carried weight. "The white men who left you there, they call me savage," he said, breaking the silence as he tended the fire. "Yet it is their hands that were cruel. They do not see the wind, nor the trees, nor the river. They only see what they fear." Clara tried to respond, her lips cracked from the cold. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Why help me? You barely know me." Taza's eyes, dark and deep, met hers. "Because you are good," he said simply, "and because good must be protected." His words, so plain yet profound, struck her with unexpected force. In that moment, Clara felt the boundaries between their worlds blur, the white world of settlers and rules, and the wild world of the Apache, of survival and honor. Over the next several days, Clara's body began to recover under Taza's care. He taught her how to move carefully through the snow, how to avoid the hidden patches of ice that could claim a limb, and how to read the tracks of animals in the forest. She learned that every footprint in the snow told a story, and that the wind itself could guide those who knew how to listen. Taza watched patiently as she struggled at first, correcting her stance gently, encouraging her with quiet nods and soft words. In his presence, she began to feel strength returning to her body, and a fragile sense of peace returning to her mind. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Taza tending the flames while Clara attempted to speak the few words of his language she could remember from the brief lessons with the boy she had once saved. She stumbled over pronunciations, but he only smiled, patient and understanding. They exchanged stories, Clara sharing fragments of her life on the ranch, her lost family, and the small joys of a world she feared she would never see again. Taza spoke of the land, of his people, of the spirits that lived in the cliffs and rivers. Each tale was filled with reverence, a deep connection to the earth that Clara found both humbling and intoxicating. Despite their differences, a bond began to form between them, delicate but undeniable. Clara found herself drawn to Taza's quiet strength, the way he moved with certainty and respect, even in a world that treated him as an outsider. She realized, too, that she was learning from him, about patience, about survival, about seeing the world not as something to conquer but as something to honor. Her fear of the unknown began to shift into trust and eventually into something more dangerous. A sense of longing, a fragile attraction that both exhilarated and terrified her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the canyon walls and painted the snow in shades of pink and gold, Taza handed Clara a small piece of dried venison. She accepted it with trembling hands, noting how the firelight danced in his dark eyes. "You are stronger than you think," he said softly. "Stronger than the winter, stronger than those who would harm you." Clara looked at him, her breath catching, unsure whether to speak the words that burned on her tongue. I don't know if I can ever repay you," she murmured. Taza shook his head. "Do not speak of repayment. There is no debt in saving life, only the land, the wind, and the fire that warms you. That is enough." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, and in that silence Clara felt the weight of connection, a recognition that she was no longer alone, that someone truly saw her, understood her, and valued her life. Days turned into a week, and the blizzard became a memory, leaving the canyon bathed in sunlight and crisp winter air. The snow around the fire melted, revealing patches of earth and rock. Clara and Taza explored the hidden corners of the canyon, learning its secret paths, the frozen streams, and the hidden alcoves where animals sought shelter. Each day brought new lessons and a deepening intimacy, a wordless understanding growing between them. She laughed at her own clumsiness in the snow, and he laughed with her, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like music. Yet even in this sanctuary, the danger of the world outside never fully disappeared. The settlers who had left her to die could return at any moment, their hatred fueled by fear and prejudice. Clara knew that staying here meant leaving behind her old life forever, and Taza knew that taking her with him would bring scrutiny and risk. But for now, in this moment, they existed in a bubble of warmth, trust, and quiet love. As night fell one evening, Clara wrapped herself in the blanket Taza had given her and watched him tend the fire, his figure silhouetted against the dancing flames. She felt a tenderness she had never known, a connection that went beyond words or reason. Here, in the canyon of spirits, amidst the snow, the cliffs, and the flickering firelight, she realized the truth of his promise, that she would never be cold again, not just in body, but in heart. And as she drifted into sleep, the wind outside carrying whispers of the distant plains, Clara felt a warmth she had never known, a warmth that came not only from fire or blanket, but from the presence of the man who had saved her, and who now held her life, her safety, and perhaps unknowingly her heart in his hands. Spring had barely begun to tease the high plains with hints of green, when danger returned to Clara Whitlock and Taza. The snow had melted into rivulets that ran through the canyon, and the sun had softened the cliffs, but the memory of the blizzard and the cruelty of the settlers never left their minds. Clara had regained strength, her muscles no longer trembling with weakness, her hands no longer blue from frostbite. She moved with confidence now, following Taza through the canyon paths she had once feared. But this confidence would soon be tested. The settlers, drunk with vengeance and blinded by hatred, had not forgotten the girl they had left to die. They were men of brutality, armed and angry, who saw her survival as a challenge to their authority and a stain upon their pride. Rumors of her rescue had reached them through whispers in nearby towns. A white girl, alive and sheltered by an Apache warrior. Infuriated by the thought, they formed a small posse and followed her trail, thinking revenge would be simple. They did not anticipate that the wilderness nor the man who protected her would fight back. Clara was the first to sense their presence. She had been walking ahead of Taza, gathering firewood along a frozen stream, when she noticed the unnatural crunch of hooves over the still frozen earth. Her heart stuttered in her chest. She turned to Taza, who was inspecting the snow for animal tracks, and spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "They're here." His dark eyes, always so unreadable, flickered with a controlled intensity. He scanned the ridge above, counting the number of men. 6, armed and reckless, their shadows elongated by the afternoon sun. Taza did not panic. He moved with a predator's precision, taking Clara's hand and leading her silently behind a thick curtain of juniper trees. "Stay close," he murmured.
"They come with malice."
"Do not fear, but prepare." Clara's pulse raced. She had learned much under Taza's guidance, how to move quietly, how to read the snow, how to anticipate danger. But this was the test of all her lessons, the moment when survival and courage collided. The settlers entered the canyon shouting, their voices harsh and abrasive against the natural quiet. They brandished rifles and revolvers, their eyes searching for the girl who had defied them. Clara's stomach churned as she realized how close they were to discovering her. Taza knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers, steadying her trembling fingers. "Aim where you must, but do not waste the fire of your life on hate alone," he said. His voice, calm and authoritative, grounded her. Then the battle began. A rifle cracked, echoing against the canyon walls, and Taza moved like liquid shadow, firing arrows with deadly precision. Clara, though terrified, remembered the spare rifle he had taught her to use. Her hands, once trembling from cold, now gripped the weapon with determination. She fired, not aiming to kill but to protect, to keep the men at bay. The snow erupted in a spray of red as the first man fell, screaming, the cold air mixing with blood and fear. Clara gasped, a wave of adrenaline and horror washing over her. But Taza's steady presence reminded her to focus. The fight became a blur of movement, snow, and smoke. Taza was everywhere at once, protecting Clara, striking from the shadows, ensuring no harm came to her. The settlers, though armed, were disorganized, their anger clouding their judgment. Each attempt to advance was met with precise retaliation, their numbers dwindling as the canyon became a theater of chaos. Clara's heart pounded, not only from fear, but from a strange exhilaration she could not deny. She realized she was fighting alongside the man she admired, the man she was beginning to love, and that bond gave her strength she had never known. Finally, the attackers fled, wounded and broken, leaving a trail of red in the melting snow. The canyon, once serene and sacred, was now marked by violence and survival. Clara collapsed to her knees, tears mingling with the blood and snow, shaking with relief and horror. Taza knelt beside her, examining his own shoulder where a bullet had grazed his arm. The wound was shallow but bleeding steadily. Clara's hands, trembling yet determined, tore strips from her dress and bound him as best she could. "You shouldn't have stayed for me," she whispered, panic lacing her voice. "It's my fault you're hurt." Taza shook his head, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart seize. "The wind does not abandon the flame it loves," he said softly, his breath mingling with the cold air. "It shields it. And the flame, you are that flame." His words, simple yet profound, struck her with the force of a revelation. In that moment, Clara realized the depth of their connection, that their bond was no longer just survival, but something deeper, something that could not be denied even amidst blood and danger. The canyon grew silent once more, the echoes of violence fading into the cliffs and the river below. Taza leaned back against the rocks, his hand brushing Clara's. She felt the warmth of his skin through the thin cloth, a stark contrast to the cold snow around them. Their eyes locked, and for a moment there was no past, no settlers, no world outside, and only the two of them, survivors bound together by courage, necessity, and the faint beginnings of love. Night fell slowly over the canyon, and the fire, which had survived the chaos, became their anchor. Taza tended it carefully while Clara sat close, her hands lingering near his, seeking warmth and reassurance. The fight had changed them both. Clara had seen the fragility of life, the brutality men could bring, but she had also seen the strength, the honor, and the unwavering protection of the man beside her. Taza had witnessed her courage, her willingness to fight, to stand, to survive. And in that, he found a fierce beauty that went beyond physical attraction, a spirit that matched his own in resilience and dignity. As they sat together, the night quiet and still, Clara rested her head on Taza's shoulder. The bullet wound on his arm throbbed faintly, a reminder of the danger that had passed, but also of the intimacy forged in battle. For the first time since being tied to the tree, she allowed herself to feel safe, not just from the cold, but from the violence of the world outside. And in that safety, she felt a warmth that was more than physical, a spark of connection, of love, of something enduring. The blood on the snow would eventually fade. The wounds would heal, but the bond between Clara and Taza, tempered in violence and survival, would remain unbreakable. In the heart of the canyon, amidst the cliffs and the river, they discovered a truth that no threat could undo, that courage, loyalty, and love could bloom even in the harshest winters, and that sometimes life's greatest trials reveal the depths of the heart. And as they watched the stars emerge over the canyon walls, Taza whispered once more, a promise carried on the cold wind. "You'll never be cold again." Spring had fully awakened the high plains, and with it came the soft warmth of sun filtering through the canyon walls. Snowmelt ran in crystalline streams, carving delicate paths through the red earth, and wildflowers timidly peered through the thawing soil. Clara Whitlock walked beside Taza now with steadier steps, her once frozen fingers no longer stiff, her lungs no longer burning with cold. She had learned the language of survival, the rhythm of the land, and the quiet strength of the man who had saved her life. But as the landscape bloomed with life, Clara became acutely aware of the chasm that separated their worlds, hers, tethered to white settlers and the rigid expectations of society, and his rooted in Apache tradition, the land, and the freedom of the wilderness. Their days were spent exploring the hidden canyons, crossing frozen streams that now gushed with spring water, and tracing animal tracks along the cliffs. Taza moved with an ease that Clara could only admire, each step precise, deliberate, in harmony with the land itself. She followed, often stumbling, but he never let go of her hand. He guided her, teaching her how to read the movement of the wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of birds. And in these lessons, Clara began to feel a connection not only to the land, but to Taza himself. A bond forged through shared struggle, survival, and quiet moments of intimacy. Yet, the outside world was never far from their thoughts. The settlers who had once left her to die were still out there, their hatred smoldering like embers beneath the snow. The army patrolled the territories wary of Apache bands, while rumors of their presence circulated in nearby towns. Clara understood the reality. To remain with Taza was to live in exile, to exist beyond the reach of the world she once knew. And Taza, though protective, understood the precariousness of their bond. A white woman sheltered by an Apache warrior would never be accepted by either world. Despite these dangers, Clara and Taza found solace in each other. Their evenings were spent beside the fire they had built in a hidden alcove of the canyon. The flames danced across their faces, revealing emotions neither had yet spoken aloud. Clara found herself lingering near him, drawn not only to the warmth of his body but to the quiet intensity of his gaze. She realized that she no longer feared the wilderness. She feared the idea of life without him, and Taza in turn observed her with an understanding that went beyond words. He saw her courage, her spirit, her willingness to embrace life even when faced with betrayal and death. One evening, as the sun bled gold and pink over the horizon, Taza guided Clara to a meadow just beyond the canyon's edge. The river ran swift and clear, and the wildflowers swayed in the soft breeze. He knelt beside her, picking a small blossom and handing it to her with a quiet reverence. "The world is changing," he said, his voice low, almost mournful. "But some things endure. The river, the canyon, the sky, and the heart if it is brave." Clara's fingers brushed his as she accepted the flower, and a shiver ran down her spine, not from cold, but from the intensity of the moment. She spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Taza, I don't know where I belong anymore. My life was here in the world of the white men, but now I feel like this land, this life is mine too. If only I could stay without fear." Taza looked at her, his expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. "To stay is to leave the world you know," he said. "To leave is to carry the world with you, and yet, your heart is already chosen even if your mind hesitates." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She knew the truth of his words. She had chosen him, the canyon, the river, the wind, the life of freedom and survival intertwined with the man who had saved her. But she also knew the sacrifices it demanded, the loss of family, the safety of civilization, the judgment of a world that would never understand. That night, under a canopy of stars, Clara and Taza made camp by a quiet stream. The fire crackled between them, the air filled with the scent of pine, earth, and wildflowers. They shared stories of their pasts, of lost parents, of childhood memories of hardships endured. Clara spoke of her mother's lullabies and her father's stern but loving guidance. Taza spoke of the spirits of the land, the lessons of the elders, and the lives of his people. Through these stories, they discovered a mutual understanding, a bridge between two worlds that had seemed impossible to cross. As the fire's warmth surrounded them, Taza reached for Clara's hand. Their fingers entwined, and in that simple gesture lay a promise deeper than any spoken vow. "The cold will come again," he whispered, his breath mingling with the night air. "The world is always winter to those who fear love. But you have chosen, and I will not let the winter touch you again." Clara pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly belong, to one man, to one land, and to a life of freedom and danger intertwined. In the following days, Clara and Taza prepared for the inevitable judgment of the world outside. They trained, they mapped escape routes, and they became attuned to every sound of the canyon, the rustle of deer, the distant call of hawks, the snap of branches underfoot. Yet amidst this preparation, they also allowed themselves moments of tenderness, shared meals by the fire, whispered conversations in the early morning light, the quiet thrill of discovering one another in the safety of the canyon. Through these experiences, Clara came to understand that love was not a sanctuary from the world, but a force that gave her strength to face it. Taza, too, understood that his feelings for her were no longer a fleeting protection, but a commitment, a bond that transcended cultural boundaries, danger, and the harsh judgments of others. Together they existed between two worlds, one of danger and survival, and one of love and devotion. As the season turned fully to spring, Clara looked out across the canyon from their hidden alcove. The cliffs glowed with warm light, the river shimmered with life, and the wind carried whispers of the plains beyond. She realized that life had brought her to a crossroads, and that she had chosen a path less certain but infinitely more alive. Taza's hand found hers, grounding her, reminding her that no matter the trials ahead, she would not face them alone. And in that quiet canyon between two worlds, Clara Whitlock finally understood the depth of Taza's promise, that she would never be cold again, in body, in spirit, or in heart. Their bond had become their sanctuary, their courage their shield, and their love a force that neither snow nor prejudice could diminish. Years had passed since Clara Whitlock had been left to die in the frozen plains of New Mexico territory. Snow had returned to the high country each winter. Rivers had run their course, and the canyons had witnessed countless storms. But some stories endure beyond the reach of time, carried in whispers across towns, trails, and firesides. Among these stories was the tale of the girl who had been saved from death by an Apache warrior, a story that became legend as the years etched themselves into the land. Clara and Taza had built a life together in a hidden canyon, far from the reach of settlers and soldiers. The world outside remained hostile, but within the embrace of the cliffs and the wind they had found a sanctuary. Their days were filled with survival and harmony, tending the small patches of fertile land along the river, following the migrations of deer and elk, and learning the rhythms of the land that had become their home. Their love had grown as naturally as the wildflowers that sprang from the thawing earth each spring, fierce, resilient, and undeniable. Clara had changed in the wilderness. Her hair, once bound in delicate braids typical of white society, now flowed freely, threaded with feathers and beads that spoke of her life with Taza. Her eyes, once wide with fear and uncertainty, now gleamed with confidence and wisdom. And Taza, who had once been a shadow moving silently through snowstorms, now carried himself with a quiet pride, knowing that the woman beside him was both his equal and his heart's reflection. Together they embodied a balance of worlds, the resilience of settlers and the harmony of the Apache, the courage to survive and the freedom to live. Travelers who passed near the canyon spoke of glimpses of the pair riding together, moving like spirits over the cliffs and valleys. Some claimed to see a woman with golden hair braided with feathers riding alongside a tall, dark warrior. Their movements were so fluid, so seamless that they seemed more a part of the land than of the human world. Those who encountered them respected the unspoken understanding between the two, sensing the power of a bond forged through life and death. Rumors began to spread in border towns and trading posts, whispered in the night over fires and shared drinks. She was saved by the Apache, people said, their voices hushed with awe, and now she rides with him, fearless, untamed. Others told more romanticized versions. The girl left to die in the snow now rides with the warrior who saved her, and they are inseparable. It is said the wind itself bends to their will, protecting them from harm. Even among skeptics, the story carried a weight, a hint of truth that could not be denied. In their hidden canyon, Clara and Taza faced their own challenges. The outside world still posed threats, from soldiers to settlers who disapproved of their union. Yet they were prepared. Years of survival had honed their skills to the point where danger could no longer surprise them. And more importantly, the love they shared had become a shield far stronger than any weapon. Unyielding, unwavering, and tempered in the fires of adversity. They also began a family, raising children between two cultures, two languages, two fires. Clara taught them the songs of her youth, while Taza taught the ways of the land, the lessons of the Apache, and the wisdom of the spirits that whispered through the cliffs. The children grew strong, confident, and fearless, embodying the bridge between worlds that their parents had created. Through them, the bond of Clara and Taza became a living legacy, a testament to love that could defy prejudice, danger, and winter itself. Despite the hardships and the lingering dangers, there were moments of peace, laughter, and tenderness. Clara and Taza would often sit by the fire in the evenings, sharing stories of the past, reliving memories of that fateful winter, and marveling at the life they had built together. They never forgot the storm, the cruelty that had set them on this path, or the cold that had once threatened to claim Clara's life. And yet, they also never forgot the promise that had been made in that moment of rescue. "You'll never be cold again." Those words had carried them through every hardship, every threat, and every joy. The legend of the Winter Bride grew not just in the towns and trading posts, but in the hearts of those who dared to love beyond boundaries. Mothers would whisper the story to their daughters, travelers would tell it around campfires, and even the Apache and settlers alike would nod with respect at the tale of a girl who survived the cruelty of men and the harshness of the wilderness, only to find warmth and love in the arms of a warrior. As the years rolled on, Clara and Taza's love became inseparable from the land itself. Their laughter echoed through the canyons, blending with the cries of hawks and the rush of rivers. Their footsteps left trails in the soft soil, both literal and symbolic, marking a life that had been claimed not by violence, but by courage, resilience, and devotion. They became living proof that love could transcend fear, culture, and the bitter winters of life. And when the snow returned each year, as it inevitably did, the wind across the high plains seemed to carry a promise that had begun long ago. Travelers would swear they heard whispers along the canyon ridges, the story of a girl who had been left to die in the snow, of the warrior who had rescued her, and of the love that had burned bright ever since. The legend endured, immortalized not just in tales, but in the lives of those who had witnessed it, and in the hearts of Clara and Taza, whose fire had never dimmed. In the quiet moments, as they watched the sun set over the cliffs, Taza would take Clara's hand and murmur those same words that had saved her life. "You'll never be cold again." And she would smile, knowing that in the heart of the wilderness, with the wind in their hair and the canyon beneath their feet, they had indeed found a love that could withstand any storm, any prejudice, and any winter. Thus, the legend of the Winter Bride endured, a story of survival, of courage, and of a love that bridged worlds, whispered across generations, and carried on the winds of the high plains, eternal and unbroken.